interesting, very eye-opening presentation. Thank you for showing how agroforest can actually provide robust solutions for adaptation and support resilience, mainly in building resilience of the landscape and also putting people at the center. And I think Asta also tried to highlight the fact that there's this deadly war in Tigray that has been actually neglected by the international community. I think the focus has all went to Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, but there are also other humans who are dying in the other part of the world. They are in starvation. There's a serious crisis happening there, and it's important that we also make people aware of this. Thank you. So we're going to have at least, we are almost running out of time, but we still have time for our open discussion. So we're going to have 15 to 20 minutes of discussion, please. I'll start taking up questions and then we can open up debate. You want to say something, Stefano, before?
I have a question to Barbara. I liked very much your presentation. Don't you believe that your proposal concerning the construction sector presupposes a different notion of city planning? Take the case of Italy. Most of Italian cities were medieval. And so what you suggested, for instance, in the case of Italian cities cannot be applied. The only place where an attempt was done in the past 10 years was Milan, but it was a failure, exactly for that purpose. So it is obvious that you have to link, that is my question to you, if we do not need to rethink the idea of the city as civitas, not as urbs. And you know what Cicero defined the civitas and not urbs. And I have also a question to Joachim and Alisher. Your paper is very important, no doubt, it's very feasible. My question is, don't you believe that a problem with the food systems is also connected to the oligopolistic structure that this sector has taken in the past 20, 25 years? As we know, 5 multinationals are controlling almost 92% of the food system. Why do I say so? Because the proposals that you advanced, which I totally agree with, most of the time are blocked by this corporation, this multinational. So perhaps we also need to consider what is called economic institutional change if we want to implement the proposals that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now have John, so please, we first take questions, then we will, I think I'll take the first 4 questions, then we respond, then we come to the second round of questions. Okay, so it's John, then Luro, is it Luro? And then Hassan, please.
No, thanks, Joyce. First of all, I'd like to say this very session was at the heart, I think, of the whole resilience discussion. So 4 brilliant talks, and I hope they will be available for everybody, but I'm sure this will happen, that we can download the presentations if you allow, because I learned so much actually from each single intervention here. So on Barbara's talk, which of course I'm very much interested in, because I think the built environment, and it was wonderful to see from you, Asta, but this could also be done agroforestry within cities actually. So we will have an entanglement of rural and urban spaces in the future, nature and technology. I think that really is the future. So let me make one comment on that, which is often overlooked. For example, not only do we not value sort of things that nature is providing to us, but also what ancient civilization did regarding adaptation to climate change. So very few people know that in Iran, there is the city of Yazd, which is also World Heritage Site. And they have these wind towers, for example, where, I mean, built 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, which do natural cooling just by design. So it's really design, it's not electricity, whatever. And below the city, there is a subterranean river, which is coming from the mountain, which is cooling from below. So it's geothermal cooling, which we did 1,000 years ago. And the climate is like 45 degrees in the summer, 48 degrees. So we have completely forgotten about this with the Industrial Revolution and the colonial sort of imposing of Western very low standard technologies. So concrete is not the solution here. So I just wanted to remind. I have a question for Barbara. Barbara, you know that biomimicry, biomimetics and so on was very cool and fashionable in the 1960s, 1970s, and obviously nature has offered many solutions. Why was it forgotten, actually? Yeah? So it is very strange in my view. And I have a question on the excellent presentation by Joachim and Alicia also. I was struck that you did not mention, you mentioned it in passing, but you didn't make it prominent, actually, is dietary change, for example, because this is a solution you can do overnight if we reduce meat. I mean, it seems to be a motherhood statement, but this is one of the very few fast and rapid sort of variables we have in the game, because agriculture you can change within a year what you till and so on, and so in my view, this over the next decade is one of the very few things where we can actually use as an intervention at scale. So I'm sure you have thought extensively about it, but I think it should be prominent in any resilience strategy for food production. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that. And I'll give the floor to Luro.
Do you hear me? Okay. Yes, so I had two comments, I should say. One is about food, because food makes up like 30 to 40% of the greenhouse emissions. And what I've read is that the greenhouse emissions due to 1 kilogram of meat is like 30 times more than the greenhouse emissions due to 1 kilogram of wheat. So I think that maybe also something to reduce greenhouse emissions is to change your diet, maybe. So, and also that we maybe like teach this schools. And the second is not really about the presentation today, it was more about yesterday, that maybe instead of also giving, no, the second question, no, sorry.
Thank you for the questions, thank you for that. I'll take Mohammed Hassan. So I'll do the first questions and then I will pose them to the speakers and then we do another round of questions.
Thank you very much. Two very quick questions. One to Joachim and Alisher. In your analysis of the food system shock, have you taken into consideration the demographic trends, especially population growth, and the rapidly changing age distribution worldwide? The second is Aditi. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't really hear you mentioning the important role of technology in saving water. For example, reducing the amount of water in agriculture that consumes 70% of fresh water through technologies that are very well known, drip irrigation, drones, robots, and so on. And water in industry, I don't know what type of technologies that are in place. Maybe Robert can say something about that to save water there, because it consumes 19% of the fresh water, and also water at home. So I'm sure that there are technologies that are in place for moving forward to try to reduce the amount of fresh water that is being utilized by various sectors. So if you can say a few words about that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. So we'll start with Barbara. So in response to the question, we'll start with Barbara.
Okay, so since Virgilio has left for a moment, then I will leave his questions at the end, and I will address the question from Stefano. Thank you very much. And of course, we are talking here about holistic transformation of cities and living habitats. And if we focus solely on buildings, it leads to nowhere. We have to transform cities. And that's also one of the things we were talking about with John yesterday. We may use the approach based on fractal geometry, but definitely the things that have to be redesigned are ventilation corridors and urban corridors. So everything should be combined with flows. That's why I address that. And regarding the living structures on the buildings, it depends, because first, of course, we are talking about new buildings which can be now, which can be designed in a completely different way. And there is a project I mentioned to some of you, the project which is called Ecolobs, which is funded by the European Commission, and it stands for Ecological Building Envelopes. So it is under the FETOPAN, which means high risk and potentially high gain project. And it actually right now, it measures and tries to assess the potential risks and gains from living structures on the building surfaces dedicated to all kind of non-humans users, which involves not only plants, but also insects, small animals living in habitats. So it's all about competitions and about potential neighbors that we can live in peace with them, and some of them that we rather keep in a distance. So this is very interesting, and this is just the beginning. But when talking about already existing buildings, it is still possible, and it doesn't have to be necessarily the whole structure with trees, which was achieved in Park Royal. And as you said, in Milan, there are mixed feelings, but still buildings like that are at the experimental stage. But we can also apply some modules on existing building, so it still helps the situation. And initially, I didn't want to speak about this, but maybe I will share the good news that my PhD student was awarded with European Bauhaus Prize because she designed green shutters that can be, they are very lightweight, and they can be applied to any buildings because they are movable. There are they are inspired by traditional solutions such as wooden external louvers that we have in Rome, but these are combined with green plants that can be and then can be planted there. So she just got 12,000 euro, and she's going to build the prototype. So I will be, of course, happy to share any progress. And that brings me to the question from John, that indeed we need to effectively learn from the past, because some solutions developed by generations, they are just time proven, and that they work very well. They are sustainable. They typically use what nature has to offer. So Iranian architecture and all kind of cooling methods developed, for example, in Egypt by these traditional solutions, and also introduced into Western architecture. They can be very effective, and one of such wonderful examples how we can learn from the past and combine it with nature-based solutions is not only ventilation but also green roofs. Now the whole world is using green roofs because this helps to extend biodiversity and permeable structures, but these were used for ages, literary ages, starting from Skara Brae in Orkneys, and we can share the knowledge because today we have this opportunity. So indeed, I truly believe that knowledge-based approach can combine nature, technology, and some traditional solutions. And you just mentioned 60s, which were very revolutionary, and their biomimicry was perceived on multiple levels. And we can go even earlier in the time to hemisolar houses designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and the other architects who proposed biomimicry, and maybe not fully biomimetics, but they experimented with this, like Atilovac, who proposed habitology, and several other concepts like Javier Senosian in Mexico. But indeed, these concepts were dominated by a huge lobby of concrete and steel, which was business-oriented, in fact, which produced huge incomes, and these natural concepts were a little bit neglected, like a hippie style, and then they were forgotten. Similarly, like Jacques Cousteau works were forgotten because coming into space was more progressive and gained more popularity. So I truly believe we wasted some time. We already know the examples. And well, I will finish with that. Of course, we need to come back to some ideas forgotten.
I'm reminded that we don't have so much time, and your discussion is very interesting. And I think participants can take time later to chat with you directly. Yeah, it's okay. So I will now give the floor to Alicia and Joachim. You have questions from Stefano. You have a question from John, Leroy, and Hassan. Please go ahead.
Alicia, why don't? Okay, thank you. So I will start perhaps with the question by Monsignor Serondo on the transgenic bioscience innovations that you made at the beginning. Of course, UN Food Systems Summit, it's one of the recommendations that bioscience innovations need to play a role in our future resilient food systems. Yesterday, Monsignor, you talked about hidden potentials in this world that science has the job to discover. So probably this is one of those concealed potentials that science is trying to discover that will help to feed the world in the future. On the problem of oligopolistic structures, I think this is a very important question, and we need more specific, rigorous modeling studies comparing how would it work, oligopolistic markets versus different types of, for example, purely competitive markets. Yeah, but it's if it's just about lobbying pressure, then what is important is to make regulations, I think, that will limit price-fixing behaviors or other kind of oligopolistic market behaviors. Of course, they have less coordination problems, less transaction costs for lobbying, but this is could probably also happen with other types of markets as well. Now, I mean, farmer lobby is very strong in many countries of the world, but they are not really oligopolistic markets as well. So there are, I think, I don't have very many different ideas on this topic, but I think at least we need a little bit more rigorous studies to be able to come to compare different options. Dietary change, yes, definitely, it should be part of the problem. Moving to healthy diets saves about 4 to 5 gigatons. So it's about 8 to 10% of the total emissions. It will not solve the problem by itself, but it's an important contribution to addressing greenhouse gas emissions. Healthy diets are not affordable now. Healthy diets require much more consumption of fruits and vegetables, which is not happening. Healthy diets means increasing meat consumption in some parts of the developing countries, low-income countries. 2 billion women are suffering from anemia, yeah? And it means lowering meat consumption in some other countries, high-income countries where there is excessive, perhaps, meat consumption. So that's definitely part of, right, yes. And of course, population growth also needs to be, it's part of this problem definitions. I personally do not always see it as a problem. I also see it as an opportunity, more people, more ideas, more innovations. But also, of course, we need more capacity to produce more food to feed growing people. Yeah.
Maybe I add a couple of remarks, if Chair permits. From perspective of our academy, Marcelo, you know that we have focused on biotechnology for quite some time. We have leading scientists with Professors Charpentier and Ludner and Francis Arnold in the academy, who are the pioneers of CRISPR and biotech. And we will have to relate the new science of biology to the food and nutrition issues. The interesting news, which may not be well known, is that the Philippines have released the so-called golden rice, so the beta-carotene enriched rice. And there was, so it passed all regulatory hurdles, but that's the only country so far. But nevertheless, after 30 years of battles, first between the corporate sector was trying to capture patents, and then between science and civil society concerns, this breakthrough was achieved earlier this year. So let's see. I believe the health research community needs to be much more engaged in this debate, so that this is not just the corporates, the civil society, and the scientists. I feel on the demographic trends, Mohammed, it is absolutely clear that girls' education is #1 priority to bend that curve, and that curve is bending. The population growth curve is far beyond the inflection point, and now at 0.8% is global population growth. That's good news for the environment. Lastly, I completely agree with Laurent's point. We have to question the excessive meat consumption, where it is excessive. And it is excessive not only in the north versus south, it is excessive across middle and high income groups worldwide. And that has this huge environmental footprint. Stefano, I have not much to add to what Alicia said, but we need to distinguish between the seed sector, the fertilizer sector, the food industry sector, and the retail sector. The retail sector is the most powerful one. It has local oligopolistic and monopolistic structures. I'm less concerned about the seed and fertilizer sectors, oligopolistic structures, because there are alternatives of actors. But the smallholder farming sector needs to be protected against excessive input market power in certain locations, and we need to watch that. As I have the floor, I want to ask a question to Aditi. Why is there not faster progress, faster progress with solar drip irrigation? I have seen so beautiful schemes on that. Can you tell me how are we dealing with that and what needs to happen to scale that up? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joachim, for those responses. I now go to Aditi. I think you had a question from Asan.
Question from Hassan and a question from Joachim, and they're kind of related in terms of technology. And I agree, while I did not touch upon it in my presentation, but it's an important aspect. Just a caveat that what we know in the water community very well, but is often, perhaps we are not that good communicators. What is not known outside is that not all water-saving technology saves water. Actually, some so-called water-saving technologies can make scarcity even worse, and drip irrigation is one of those examples. So what happens is, if you are implementing drip in a region where it's not 100% irrigated, so the farmers are keeping land fallow because they don't have enough water. So the moment they adopt drip irrigation, they actually bring in more land under agriculture, under irrigation. So the overall water consumption goes up instead of declining. So we have to be really, because I mean, at the moment, so there are these kind of interesting kind of things. So none of these are silver bullets. We have to be very careful about which technology works where. And we have almost always seen that, some kind of technology then leads to more energy intensity. So maybe drip irrigation might lead to even higher energy use if that energy is not renewable. So I think there's this constant water, energy, food trade-offs that we have to keep making. And drip is a good example of that. But there is a deep understanding within the water community about all of these. While saying that technology is important, to you, Joachim, I would, so that's the project that I'm leading in 4 countries in South Asia on solar irrigation. And the reasons for these are various. Why this not moving as fast? For one, it's moving fast. In India, for example, we have almost 30 million pumps, like between 25 to 30 million pumps in the region. And right now we have around 300,000 solar pumps have been already adopted in India. So there are around maybe 5,000 solar pumps in Nepal, around 10,000 in Bangladesh. So the last 3-4 years have seen rapid increase in solar adoption of solar irrigation. But remember, the region has 30 million pumps. So even with all of these, it comes to maybe maximum 500,000. So that's a small fraction of what we have to replace over time. And the issues are several. A lot of it actually is about, many of these pumps are off-grid. So, and the grid electricity is coming very fast, as yesterday Robert was saying. So many of these off-grid pumps are getting dysfunctional. The moment cheaper grid electricity comes in, farmers stop using solar pumps. So what we are trying to do is to make sure that these solar pumps are connected to the grid and farmers can sell electricity back to the grid. So we are kind of using it as a way incentive for also saving groundwater. If farmers are getting good income to not pump, but to sell electricity, so we are kind of having triple dividends, saving water by not pumping, by earning income by selling electricity. So all those are happening, but not as speed as required. And I think finance is one big reason. So farmers are paying a disproportionately high share of these. I mean, even with 50%, 60% subsidy, the cost is still high, and some of the poorest farmers are having to pay for this. So I would think that is one. Governance is a major issue. The electricity companies are some of them are very resistant to this net metering because they see farmers as a consumer. The moment the farmer becomes from a consumer to a producer, they feel that they're losing out their revenue, which is not really true. But so there is also this mindset attitude around governance. So the reasons are multiple, but finance and governance to me comes at the top reason of the relatively slow progress. But progress has really become faster in the last 2-3 years. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those responses. I think we're starting to eat up into our tea break, but let's have the last round of questions, and I'll do an anti-clockwise round of questions. I'll start from, is it Peter? Marcelo, I'll start with you, then this way.
Sorry, but I have two questions. One, very concretely to the question of the water. We have here in the Academy in the past 2 meetings about the desalination of the water of the sea. Is possible to convert the water and in a water that were used. This is one thing. What is this technique? Have some evolution today, and I know that some countries use this technique. So, and the other question is in relation with the old practice. You know, we have here in the past, but we use also. When I was child, I remember that my grandmother used this practice. We have the mass ad petendam pluviam. So to put some, to ask God something to collaborate with us. I don't understand any people that speak about this practice that I am sure that also in your countries are this practice. And it's an old practice, but it's a real practice. So, and it's very ethical. So I think this is very important to consider that also exists God and is provident and can help us also for the food, also for the water. Nothing more.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll try and be quick. I have a question for Barbara and Asta and Alicia together. But Barbara, and this links actually to, I think, Joachim's interest in the bioeconomy as well. But by some estimates, about 10% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions associated with cement production. In looking at the biological analog, there is beginning to be scientific advance on biocement, that is using microbial fermentation processes to develop bio-analog of chemical cement. This, of course, would benefit both the bioeconomy and would capture CO2 rather than producing new CO2. Do you have an opinion on that? Is this realistic at least in the medium term as a new approach to building an environment? And my comment and question to Asta and maybe Alicia as well, there's been increasing interest over the last few years in Europe on agroforestry, and you mentioned an example, and other approaches to what we're calling regenerative agriculture and sustainable food systems. And this was reflected in, until recently, in the EU policy objectives for the Green Deal, Farm to Fork, and so on. But it now seems that these ambitions, the policy ambitions, at least in Europe, will be at best delayed and maybe abandoned altogether in response to the acute crisis of the Ukrainian war and the worry about restrictions on food import into Europe. And of course, Europe imports a lot of its food. So the policy objective, at least to the uninitiated in Europe, is to switch back to food production for cheap food, and really perhaps not worry so much about biodiversity or sustainable food systems and so on. You know, that's sort of a luxury that can be abandoned in the short term. So the question is, well, how then can the scientific community convince decision makers that even under the current scenarios, biodiversity and transformative change do still matter? Thank you.
I had a number of questions, but I'd like to echo your concern about desalination, that it's limits potentially. But Let me focus on let's see, which one will I pick? I guess for Joachim and Alistair, you showed this lovely chart. I think it was on your slide number 6, where you follow the migration of this scourge of starvation from Western Europe to Eastern Europe to South Asia to Africa. Clearly pointed at Africa, I think, in the bottom row now. And with all of these other threats that Africa faces, including the very large increase in population over time, which surely contributes to the susceptibility to famine, it seems to me to be a predictable disaster or catastrophe that we face in Africa. And clearly the WFP and the FAO are deeply involved in trying to assess it and head it off. But is what we're doing adequate? Are we adequately forecasting the risk, stockpiling, creating market mechanisms, generating funds that could lead to a rapid deployment of food to head off disaster in Africa? So that's one. And then I guess for Barbara as well, I really love architects, and I enjoyed your talk very much. But it struck me that the examples you were showing us were very much a developed world. They were done by fancy architects and wonderful ideas, but the vast majority of the new building stock we're going to create will be in developing countries again, where they use a lot of concrete now, where air conditioning will become more and more important as an energy load. What's being done to translate these ideas into practical, buildable ideas that can be integrated with vernacular ideas about architecture and building materials, and can be constructed and copied by people with far less skill and originality than the brilliant people that we rely on now to produce the ideas? Are we doing enough? I'll stop there. I think we are really out of time. Sorry about that.
You're right. We are eating into our coffee time, and yeah. So the next question, I think that's the final question from Virgilio.
Thank you. This was a fantastic session. So congratulations to all of you who made fantastic presentations. I like very much what was commented by John about the colonial history of disregarding local and traditional solutions. So the agroforestry sort of solution is often disregarded by mainstream agricultural production. It's not tied to the commodities and to the multinational that control significant part of the agricultural system. And at the same time, they offer, as Aster pointed out very clearly, fantastic opportunities for mitigation as well as needs for adaptation. So I have a couple of questions, one to Joachim and Alisher, is how do you factor in traditional agricultural systems such as those agroforestry that were presented by Aster? In Aster, I think the role of trees in the water cycle and in providing food security probably needs to be highlighted in our report, in our final conclusions, because probably that's one of the options that is most relevant. And here I'd like to ask Aditi, if in your assessment in the IPCC process of effectiveness, did you assess cost effectiveness of these different solutions, considering these 3 crises that we're tackling, not only climate, but also biodiversity and inequality? Because it seems to me that the agroforestry systems that Aster talked so well, they probably would stand out as being the most cost-effective type of solutions if we consider inequality, biodiversity, together with mitigation and adaptation. So I'd be curious to see what you have to say on that regard. And finally, I think there's a point, Joaquin, that we need to take note in our report, because in our report we only mentioned the Ukraine war. But I think it's essential that we don't have a Eurocentric view, and we consider also the Tigray war that I learned from Aster, and I had the time to look into the literature, and it's just amazing. It's much, much worse than Ukraine. So we should put it actually first than Ukraine, instead of saying, just to make the point that we are not Eurocentric in our perspective, that we're really having a global perspective. And the final point is that it would be great to have the numbers of these 2.2 billion hectares that you're talking about, and have the maybe you mentioned 3.6 gigatons, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.